I'm shooting this video in response to an article that I recently read entitled, Black America, Please Stop Appropriating African Clothing and Tribal Marks. And I'll say this, I agree, but I also disagree with the author, and I'll explain why. Reason why I agree is because it's too often that I run into, I guess, fashionable, conscious people. You know, they have on the cara pants, you know, the kente cloth sweater, you know, with the dashiki under it. You know, they have on the Fela Kuti tribal paint. And then, you know, that I noticed that I'm gravitated towards that immediately. And I always ask the same question. And I would say 98% of the time get the same response. I always ask, have you been to Africa? And they're like, nah, bruh, haven't been to Africa, but I've been to London, I've been to Switzerland, I've been to Amsterdam, I've been to Moscow and the Kremlin, you know, I've been to the Great Wall of China, it was so beautiful, but I ain't been to Africa though. And the excuse of not going, because it's not a money issue. If you could go to all these places in Europe, but not go to Africa, but be an Afrocentric and, you know, or a conscious, fashionable person, go to Europe, spend all this bread going to Europe and not go to Africa, money is not the excuse. I'm gonna give you the two excuses I commonly get. One is so fucking ignorant. It's pretty much, how do I get to Africa? Like, seriously, how do I get to Africa? And it's the same way you got to Europe. When you bought your ticket on Delta.com or Cheapo Air, instead of putting in London, put in, you know, Nairobi or Dar es Salaam or even Cape Town, even though I'm not a big fan of South Africa. You know, Windhoek, the car, and then you buy your flight and you fly out of there. Simple enough, but you know, these smart, conscious, fashionable people try to make traveling to Africa so difficult. No, it's not. You buy a ticket and you fly over there. Or they blame it on like their significant other. Well, you know, brother, I can't, you know, my girl, man, she, you know, we booked our vacation days in our travel time, and we're going to Paris. You know, she wants to go to Paris, you know, and they both, you know, both of them are kept that cloth out, but they refuse to go to Africa. They want to book the vacation so they can be two, you know, Afrocentrics walking around in whatchamacallit, in France. You know, kente cloth out in France. And my thing is, once you just go to Ghana, where kente cloth comes from, you know, go spend time with the Ashanti tribe, you know, watch them make the fabric and, you know, learn the history behind the fabric, but they refuse to. So like the author, that's why, you know, I agree with her on, you know, Black Americans stop appropriating African fashion and tribal marks, because you refuse to, I guess, immerse yourself into African culture itself by at least just traveling there, or at least just hanging out with Africans in your immediate crew in America. The only time you really see fashionable conscious people with Africans, if it's the token jet black African model, like Sudanese model. That's the only time you'll see them with, you know, partaking or hanging out with someone that's African. If it's like that token, what's her name, Alex Week, the African model, like that jet black, super black model. That's the only time you'll see them, you know, hanging out with anybody that's born in Africa. And then I know the author mentioned Afropunk. Here's another gripe I have. So after Afropunk, or I've never been to Afropunk, so if I'm wrong, you know, put it in the comments, correct me, I'm sorry. Do they serve African food at Afropunk? And again, it's a question, but I would say this: after the Afropunk concert, you know, hey, where are we going to eat? Let's go to the Senegalese restaurant. Let's get some jebujin, some jollof rice, you know, some peanut butter stew. Let's get it in. Nah, bro, we got, me and my lady, we got reservations at the Cheesecake Factory, or Applebee's, or TJF Fridays, or Ruth Chris. So now you got a bunch of Afrocentrics, conscious African people that just left the Afropunk concert that are going to eat at the Cheesecake Factory. So again, it's just the refusal to immerse themselves into African culture. And I'm not saying to be African that you have to go to or eat African food, but you at least have to go to the continent. I mean, come on. And then a lot of times too, these fashionable conscious people are obviously in the fashion industry. And I mean, they are desperate to break into mainstream European or white driven Rand controlled fashion. I mean, instead of spending the majority of their energy, resources, and money into just creating a black fashion industry, they would rather beg people that don't like you, that refuse to give you opportunities, this racist European white fashion industry. You will beg them to, get into, walk the runway at New York Fashion Week when they don't want your black ass there. Same thing with like Paris Fashion Week. Then these same Afrocentrics complain and cry on how the white fashion industry isn't giving them a shot, instead of taking all that energy and those resources and putting it into building a true black fashion empire. So those are just some of my gripes on and why I agree with the author as far as appropriating African fashion and tribal marks. Like, if you're not going to go to Africa, if you're going to find every excuse to go to Africa, every excuse not to go to Africa, if you refuse to, I mean, I know conscious people that have never eaten African food. They eat this fake, like the conscious Afrocentrics I know, they eat this expensive ass vegan shit. Like this expensive ass couscous wraps. Like you spending $15 on a couscous wraps, and you're saying that the ancestors ate couscous all damn day in Africa, which is not true. When I go to Africa to the bush, they eat lamb, they eat goat, but primarily goat and rice. And I mean, they're not eating no. I've never met an African vegetarian or African vegan in Africa, never. So instead of eating African food, they want to eat this, couscous, Brussels sprouts, wraps, and then say that that's how the ancestors ate. Yeah, whatever. So, travel to Africa, immerse yourself into African culture, just eat some damn African food, and quit begging, the fashion industry to give you the racist fashion industry to give you a break. Now, the reason why I disagree with the author is, I think your name is Zipporah. If I'm butchering your name, I'm sorry. So I'm guessing she's of some type of African descent. But in my experience, the majority of westernized Africans have completely abandoned African culture anyway. So why do you care that some African Americans decide to put on some kente cloth sweaters? Why do you care that they're wearing African prints when the majority of westernized Africans that I know are more brand conscious, European brand conscious, than the majority of African Americans I know. So instead of, the tribal paint that the author brings up, they were in MAC cosmetics. Instead of, the Akara pants or Akara dress, it has to be Chanel or Louis Vuitton or, some European designer, some high fashion, Gucci, I don't know, some high fashion European designer. They put more emphasis on that and hold that to higher precedence or in a higher regard than their own indigenous African fashion. And when I go to Africa, in fact, I asked this question. I was in Dogon country, sitting with the Hogan, and I noticed that when I was driving around Dogon country, there were mosques and churches. And I asked the Hogan, I said, why are there mosques and churches? He said the reason why is because when the kids leave the village and go into the city, they become westernized and they come back with everything. They're pretty much foreign or foreigners when they come back to the village. So again, the majority of westernized Africans that I know have abandoned they're either Christian or Muslim. They don't practice any African indigenous religions. So they're just completely westernized, but then they want to call out African Americans for accepting a part of their, and really it's our culture too, accepting a part of, we'll just say, African culture that they've completely abandoned anyway. So, so that's why I just don't like the article, obviously is written by a westernized African. And I'll get into what a westernized African is, because think about it. She mentioned Afropunk. Afropunk was started by a black guy. And I think the other guys, like the who shot the documentary or whatever, as far as about the skaters that turned into Afropunk, I think he's Hispanic or he's a black Dominican. I don't know. I'm not sure. And then I was introduced to Afrobeat and Ghanaian High Life by a white DJ by the name of Jeremy Soul in Los Angeles at an event he used to do once a month called The Lift. So why aren't Africans introducing that to America? I tell you why. Like, for example, when I go to Africa, they listen to they listen to Western rap like we do. So they listen to Bobby Shmurda, Snoop Dogg, Drake, Dr. Dre. They rather listen to that than, the indigenous African music. Like, for example, I was in Senegal, in Touba, in Dakar, and I want to listen. Like, when I come to Africa, I don't want to do shit that I do in the West. Like, I'm not trying to listen to Drake and Bobby Shmurda in Africa. I want to listen to Lampfall. I want to listen to the Bayfall music. I want to listen to all the Fela Kuti I can, all the Afrobeat I can, all the Ghanaian High Life I can. And like my buddy started playing some Bobby Shmurda. I said, turn that shit off, man. I can hear that shit in America, in Atlanta. I don't want to hear that. So that's why, again, I just don't understand why a westernized African would even care that an African American is wearing some Ankara pants when they themselves don't wear their Ankara shit anyway. The only time I see westernized Africans really being African or honoring their culture or partaking in their culture is at weddings and Independence Day. That's it. That's the only time I see them really going in for Africa. Outside of that, until they speak and you hear their accent, or a lot of times they no longer have their accent because they're westernized, they're just African Americans like us. So let me get your thoughts. Let me get your feedback. Leave a comment below. And check out my website, search for uhuru.com. Subscribe to my page. I've been on a hiatus lately, but I'm gonna be more active and start posting more videos on just Africa and traveling to Africa and what's going on and my experience. But again, I will end it like this. I just feel that there's a disconnect between African Americans and westernized Africans. Not Africans in Africa, but westernized Africans that leave Africa and come to the West, usually for education, to go to school and college, and have no intentions on actually going back to Africa. So, they leave, their indigenous village, move to the city, become westernized, again, become more brand conscious and want to rock everything European. And appropriate. That's why this video is entitled, part of the title is, westernized Africans appropriating European culture, because they appropriate everything European from, nappy weave. African Americans got the nappy weave too. We got to let that nappy weave, that fake. When I go to Africa, I see the worst weaves ever. We got to let that shit go. That shit does not look good. Now that's another video. From European fashion to the weave, they come to the West, because at the end of the day, I feel like westernized Africans want to be African Americans anyway, because they do everything like African Americans, from dress, swag, music, everything is westernized. Everything is like African Americans. So they don't understand why African Americans want to connect back to the motherland and be African and wear African fashion, because they're like, look, we left Africa to become westernized, but you guys are going a step backwards to, into that bush mentality or that village mentality or whatever you want to call it. That's how I feel. And even when I was in Africa, In fact, if you look at my picture, my avatar, I was in Kenya, in Maasai country, or at a Maasai village, and I had on my Ankara pants, and I had on like an American Apparel T-shirt. And they told me, take off that well, you halfway there. You got on the African print pants. Now put on, it's this a traditional Maasai garb. I think it's called a shuka. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. I'll put the correct name of it in the comment box or in the description box. So again, like I said, there's a disconnect between African Americans and westernized Africans. But Africans in Africa are cool. They want us to come back and adopt it. But I just think some westernized Africans are hating on it because they don't understand why we want to be African, like really African, something that they're abandoning to become westernized and become more like African Americans. If that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. So check out the rest of my videos. Let me know what you think. Hit me up. I'm out.